Good afternoon and welcome to our EAStalk webinar. Today we will cover how to convene, plan and chair a session at our Aquaculture Europe event. Our presenter today is Damien Toner, Development and Innovation Executive with BIM in Ireland's National Seafood Agency. His work involves creating improved linkage between academia and industry, in particular around new technologies. He has worked extensively in aquaculture for both the private and public sector across a range of species. An elected member of the European Aquaculture Society Board of Directors, he has chaired many webinars, workshops, and conference sessions at national and international levels. This EAStalk webinar will provide an overview on how to chair an oral session at the Aquaculture Europe event, providing practical and helpful information how best to manage a session from choosing from oral submission to dealing effectively with presenters and audience alike. We hope this will be a rewarding experience, and this talk will hopefully encourage more EAS members to avail of this opportunity. Our next Aquaculture Europe event will take place in beautiful Rimini in Italy this year from September 27th until September 30th. The main topic of the event this year is Innovative Solution in a Changing World. My name is Anna Viskovic, and today I will moderate this webinar. This webinar will last for approximately 45 minutes, and after presentation, we will allocate 30 minutes for the Q&A. So Damien's presentation will last for around 30 minutes. If you have any questions for Damien, please send them to us and we will follow them after the presentation. Damien, thank you so much for joining us here and for presenting this webinar today. The floor is yours. You can start with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. As Anna said, my name is Damien Toner. I work for BIM, which is Ireland's Seafood Development Agency. And I suppose the purpose of today's talk is maybe to give a few hints and tips as to how you might prepare to chair a session at an EAS event, and also to encourage some of you that might be considering to co-chair a session in future, particularly some of the younger researchers out there who might be attending this webinar, to encourage them to put their hands up and maybe think about co-chairing at a future EAS event. So I'm by no means an expert in chairing conferences, but I suppose I have nearly 30 years experience now of chairing and moderating sessions, both at EAS and other conferences and workshops. And I've tried to just encapsulate some of the things I've picked up along the way in this talk. So in general, I'm going to go through what the responsibilities are in chairing a session, a little bit about convening a session and what's involved in that, and how a conference program is put together. A little bit about the preparation that you need to partake in or do before the event and during the event itself. A little bit about managing the session, the questions and answers segment of any session, how to sum up. A few words as well on a review, which is important for EAS because it gives a feedback to EAS about how a session has progressed or gone. And also some tips that I've picked up over time as well, which I think might be beneficial. So when I was preparing this talk and getting ready to do it, I was trying to look up and assess, I suppose, what the key attributes are of an effective chairperson. And, you know, you come across a lot of things, you know, that a chairperson should be obviously formal and yet somehow informal as well, that they should be serious, but also sometimes funny, punctual, but yet flexible because not everything goes to according to plan, that you should be knowledgeable and yet as well inquisitive. Somehow you should be a good speaker and yet a good listener. You should be confident, modest, assured, vulnerable, forward and yet polite, fluent, versatile, engaging, dynamic, all these attributes. But The reality is that's just not possible. There is no such thing as the perfect chairperson. And I think what's really important for any chairperson is that you are just at ease and are yourself, that your own personality comes through. We're all different, and certainly you're giving up your time voluntarily to do something if it's at an EAS event. So you should really be at ease and be yourself. And I came across a definition from Nature magazine, which I thought was really good. They did a small publication on English communication for scientists, and it says that an effective chairperson creates a sense of coherence throughout the sometimes diverse presentation. He or she brings the speakers closer to the audience by introducing them warmly and ensures that everything runs smoothly and wraps up in the session in a way that leaves everyone feeling good about it. And I think that really nicely surmises what's expected. Essentially, in a session, you have two customers. You have the presenters, many of whom are going to be feeling nervous. In fact, everybody's going to be feeling nervous. They want to feel at ease. They want to feel that you're in control as a chairperson and have their best interests at heart, which allows them to give an effective presentation. And then you've got the audience, and you want the audience to feel and partake in the session and that they're an interactive part of it. So they're the two clientele that you're really trying to manage the session for. And if you keep them at the forefront of your thoughts, I think you'll do a good job. So a little bit about convening a session and what happens. So in the case of EAS will select a location. So obviously the next location is Rimini. They will put together a steering committee and a local organising committee. The steering committee or scientific committee will have programme chairs. So in the case of Rimini, that's Maria Letizia Fioravanti and Daniel Zarski, who are the programme chairs. And they will go through a list of possible suggestions for sessions and pick the sessions that they would like to be presented at the Congress. And then they will appoint a chair to those sessions. So they will generally select from people that have either previously done sessions or chaired them, or people that they know have an interest in a specific topic. They may also at that stage appoint a co-chair. However, quite often the chair is involved in that as well, in selecting a co-chair. And that's certainly something that EAS would really encourage, is that most sessions should have a co-chair, particularly a full session. It's really of great benefit. It's somebody else to help you with chairing the session, and it also gives the opportunity to maybe somebody that hasn't chaired a session to get a bit of experience in what's involved. So certainly that's one of the purposes of today's talk, is to encourage people out there to put their hands up and become a co-chair at a session. And I know, for example, in Rimini that there are still some co-chair slots available. So please, by all means, contact the programme chairs, and if you're interested in chairing a session or co-chairing a session. So obviously, as the convener of a session, you have a bit of responsibility to make sure that it's a full session and that you get enough abstracts. So you can, of course, approach colleagues and encourage them to submit abstracts. Obviously, abstracts are submitted online, but by all means, as a chair, proactively be involved in that session. If you want to reach out to people, fellow colleagues, people that you're aware that are doing work in that specific area, by all means reach out to them and encourage them to submit abstracts. The one thing you have to bear in mind is not to be biased. So it's quite easy to maybe just contact colleagues that you know, but try and broaden your search out. So for example, if you were chairing, I don't know, a session on IMTA, for example, and you're an expert in marine IMTA, try and reach out to the freshwater IMTA sector. Try and reach out to people that might be involved in microalgae or macroalgae or land-based or offshore, lots of different varieties of the subject that the session is on. So try and not have the session too narrow. You will be sent a list of abstracts submitted. So in the case of EAS, John Kuski, who organises the conferences on behalf of EAS, will, with the program co-chairs, make sure that a specific abstract has been submitted to the right session. Then the program co-chairs will send a list of those abstracts to you as the chair. And at that stage, you really have to start formulating the session itself. And it's a good idea to meet with the co-chair at that stage to assess the abstracts and to rank them. Ranking is very important with abstracts because if you're lucky enough, you'll have more abstracts than you need for a session. So in the case of Rimini, for example, presentations are going to be 15 minutes each, which effectively means 8 presentations in the morning and 12 in the afternoon. So if you're lucky, you're going to have more than 20 abstracts submitted, maybe up to 30, 35. And you're going to have to go through them and rank them. And obviously your priority is, first of all, to ensure that the scientific integrity of the abstract is as you would want, and that it's going to be a good talk, a good presentation on a topic that's of interest. You're also going to have to use other criteria to rank them as well. And certainly one of the ones that I would use, and I just mentioned it there, is to try and ensure you have a broad range of topics covered with regard to the session, that the session isn't too narrow. You also want to maybe try and ensure, if possible, some geographical spread so that not all the talks are from one area, for example, on Mediterranean aquaculture or salmonid aquaculture in the north of Europe. So you want to try and have as broad a range as possible, but obviously not at the expense of the quality of the presentation. So you're going to rank them according to criteria. For me personally, when I'm assessing talks in an EAS session, I want to see that the talk advances or the research advances aquaculture, commercial aquaculture. So that is not just research for research's sake, that the research is being done for a purpose which is applicable to the sector and to the advancement of aquaculture in Europe. So that's just one of the criteria that I would use as well. I mean, the key thing I think to take out of this part in convening is don't be afraid to say no. If you don't believe that an abstract or a talk is sufficient, has sufficient information to be good enough as a presentation, you can say no, and you can always get a second opinion. And if you're really not sure, you can also talk to the program co-chairs. That's what they're there for. So take a bit of time on this and really try and rank them according to a set criteria. And then you're going to try and structure the talks on the day itself according to that criteria. So again, geographical talks shouldn't all be grouped together. Remember as well that talks in EAS that aren't selected for an oral presentation can be made available as e-posters. And certainly the ranking is important as well, so that you have your top 2 or 3 e-posters, which in a full session would be number 21, 22 and 23 that weren't selected as talks but are good e-posters that you might need to utilize them in the case of a no-show, and I'll discuss that in a while as well. The other thing that quite often comes up here is that an author might submit more than one abstract for a session, and generally in EAS we wouldn't encourage the same author to give more than one talk in a session. So by all means feel free to reach out to that author and ask them on the basis that both talks are quite good and they're quite happy to select either which talk would they prefer to present. So take an active role as a chair. I'm just going to give an example here of the structure of a session, and I've just picked a random one from Madeira, which was the fish welfare session, and I thought looking at this that there was a bit of logical thought had gone into how the session was structured, and I just want to pick up on a few of those elements. I should say that I don't actually know either of the chairs in this session. I just selected it. There was a few things that caught my eye that I just want to maybe point out to people in terms of how a session is structured. So this is a talk on fish welfare, and there was 2 talks on sea bass selected and 3 on salmon. And interestingly, the chairs decided to group them together. So the 2 talks on sea bass were grouped together, and then the 3 talks on salmon were also put together, one after the other. And I think the logic here, and it makes sense to me, was that they probably felt that if somebody was coming into the session to listen to a fish welfare talk and sea bass, that they would stay on for the second talk, and also for the salmon, that if they're interested in fish welfare and salmon, that they'd like to go to attend to all 3 talks. So they've grouped those talks together. So you mightn't necessarily agree with that approach, but I think it shows a logical structure, and it shows a bit of thought by the chairs in how the talks were structured. The other thing about this session is that they covered 4 species. So there was zebrafish, sea bass, salmon, and carp. Again, freshwater and marine. So again, a bit of thought put into, covering as wide a base as possible within the remit of the session. And as well as that, there was a wider variety of topics covered under fish welfare. So nutrition, transport, fasting, physiology, etc. So they managed in just that morning session to cover a lot of different topics, different species, and there's a bit of logical thought put behind it. So, ultimately as the chair, you're responsible for how you structure the session, and you can come up with your own logic or criteria, but what's important is that you put a little bit of thought into it, and that at the very least, it makes sense to you how you've structured the talks. So a little bit about preparation, and obviously there's preparation you can do before the talk itself, or before the sessions itself, from your office or at home, and then there's preparation that you can do on site once you arrive. The first thing, and this is a little tip that I strongly believe in, is that you should know your presenters before you actually arrive on site. You should send them an email. So when you send your selected abstracts back to EAS, they will notify the presenters to let them know that they've been selected for an oral presentation. And at that stage, I think you should send an email to contact them. Let them know that you're chairing the session, introduce yourself. This has the benefit of first of all, starting a bit of communication with them. They feel that, okay, there's somebody there and they're in charge of the session and they're organized and they're reaching out to me, and that's a good sign. So it kind of puts them a bit more at ease. And secondly, it probably lessens the chances of you not knowing about a no-show, because generally people will communicate back, and if they can't attend Congress for whatever reason, be it a visa issue or something has come up, they're more likely to let you know in advance, and then you can be better prepared on the day. You should also at this stage, I think, prepare some questions on each talk based on the abstract or in communication with the presenter. This is important, definitely in the case that there's no questions coming out of the audience on the day. You have a number of questions prepared which you or the co-chair can ask. You can also prepare an e-poster for a no-show. So I previously mentioned the e-posters, ranking them, having a few e-posters that you can give a talk on. I know at a number of conferences or workshops I've attended in the past, in the case of a no-show, sometimes the chair will pull a talk out and give it themselves. I'm less inclined to do that, because I believe if somebody has gone to the effort of submitting an abstract and then preparing an e-poster, and certainly if they're at the Congress themselves, I think it's beholden on the chair and EAS to publicise that and to give them a bit of space and a bit of time to acknowledge the work that they're doing. So certainly in the past, I've discussed a number of e-posters in the case of a no-show. It's generally you've got 15 minutes to make up. You shouldn't really whip out a talk and stick it up, because you might confuse somebody that comes in and says, God, what time is it? What talk is on now? So generally speaking, I think it's good practice to have an e-poster that you can discuss and talk about with the audience. Once you arrive in Rimini or Berlin or wherever EAS Congress is on, I think it's important that you find a session room. As you know, on a number of occasions now in recent years, we've held the Congress at hotels, and sometimes the rooms can be quite far apart, and sometimes it can be difficult sometimes to find exactly where the room is. So You don't want to be doing that on the day of the session. You're the chair, go and find a session room the day before. You should also check with the speaker prep room that all the speakers have uploaded their talks the evening before. If you go and do that and find the talk hasn't been uploaded, you should go and check that the speaker has registered. So that's normally a good indication of a no-show. If they haven't registered and they haven't uploaded their talk the evening before, you have a fair idea that they mightn't be present on site. And again, you can prepare for that. So a little bit about managing the session itself on the day. It's always good practice to arrive early, of course. Familiarize yourself with the room, introduce yourself to the AV person. In recent years, there's generally been an AV person in all the rooms. Remember their name, you're going to be working with them all day. If you have a co-chair, you could have met them before the session, or this might be the first time sitting down with them. You should assign co-chair responsibilities. Generally speaking, for a co-chair, the responsibilities might be that they're in charge of timekeeping, that they might be in charge of the question and answer session, picking people to ask questions. So it's a good time to go through those responsibilities with them. You want to introduce yourself to speakers as they arrive. And I think it's really good practice and good form to learn how to pronounce their name correctly. We're all from different parts of Europe. It can be sometimes difficult for people to pronounce names properly, but I think it's beholden on you as the chairperson to be able to introduce a speaker properly and to know their name. And again, it puts them at ease. Let the speakers know how you will alert them to wrap up. So in recent years, again, I've seen systems on the presenter screen which will alert them if their time is coming up. You also have sometimes a situation where a chairperson will hold up a card to let them know they've got a few minutes left. I'm more of a fan of a verbal cue, a verbal interruption to let the speakers know, because sometimes they're so engrossed in the presentation and in the audience and looking at the screen that they might miss a visual cue from the chairperson. So by all means, be prepared to step in and let them know that they've got 1 or 2 minutes left. You want to introduce the speakers warmly. So our next speaker is Emilia Milares from the University of Bologna. Emilia's talk is on the effect of settlement substrates and feed on early stage growth of the sea urchin Paracentrotus lividus. So their name, where they're from, and what the talk is about. And then let them get on with the presentation. Keeping to time is absolutely crucial. In fact, I think it's probably the most crucial aspect of chairing any talk or session. You have to keep to time. And it's particularly crucial in parallel sessions where participants are coming in and out of rooms. They're trying to grab a talk that's at 12:50 in your session in RAS technology, and then they're running across to another talk that's at 1:15 in fish nutrition. So your absolute #1 responsibility is to keep the time. And that's again why it's important to let the speakers know when you're going to interrupt them and ask them to finish up. In Rimini, talks have been reduced to 15 minutes, which is effectively 10 to 12 minutes of speaking and then 2 to 3 minutes of questions and answers. So again, it's very important that you let the speaker know that you're going to interrupt them with probably 2 or 3 minutes left, and you're going to say you've got a minute left. So if you don't see that final slide coming, you're going to have to interrupt them again and tell them to finish up. You have to keep to time. It's an absolutely crucial element in the whole session running smoothly. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've all faced over the years at different conferences, and how you might deal effectively with the mumblers and the shy and the timid, for starters. So the mumblers, I guess, is those people that kind of don't speak clearly into the microphone and aren't articulating properly to the audience. So, and the shy and the timid again might be people that are probably, might be their first talk, not speaking clearly into the microphone, maybe turning away from the microphone to look at the screen, and then we're losing their sound. So again, by all means, feel free to jump in and say, sorry, excuse me, could you step a bit closer to the microphone, please? You're the chairperson, you're in charge of the session. You have to manage the speakers as well as you can. The overruns, again, we've seen it time and time again, where unfortunately, for whatever reason, maybe presenters are nervous or haven't practiced it properly and they overrun. You've stepped in at 12 minutes to tell them they have a minute to wrap up and they still talk on. By all means, step in again at 14 minutes and say, I'm sorry, you have to end the presentation now. At the very worst, you're going to have no time for questions and answer, which is obviously to the detriment of the presenter themselves, but that's the only leeway you have. You have to start the next talk on time. It's unfair to the next presenter not to do that, and it's unfair to the overall session. So by all means, step in if there's an overrun. The chatter boxes, which is again, unfortunately common at different workshops and conferences, where you've got a big room, you've got people down the back coming in, they haven't seen their colleague in years because of the last few years we've all had. It's great seeing people and they start talking or chatting. Again, if it's interrupting the session and if it's impacting on the presenter's presentation, you need to step in and say to the presenter, sorry, excuse me for a moment, can we please have quiet in the room? Okay, again, you're in charge, you have to take control. The grandstanders. So what is a grandstander? Sometimes in a session, you will see somebody who constantly asks questions in a questions and answer session. And unfortunately, sometimes is probably more interested in everybody else hearing their views than in actually asking questions for the presenter to answer. Again, you're selecting the people that are asking the questions. So by all means, ignore somebody that's hogging the microphone, move on to somebody else, step in and say, sorry, we have to end the discussion there. By all means, you can continue it after the session. Remember, you have to keep to that time schedule. Question and answer element, which is an important part of any presentation at EAS. It gives the audience a chance to participate. It allows the presenter to develop the skills of responding to questions on their work. I think it's really important to have an AV, have a roving mic in the room. So a roving mic isn't always so that the presenter can hear the question. Because what tends to happen, for example, is you might have somebody at the front of a room and they'll say, no, I don't need a mic, and they'll ask the presenter the question. But the problem there is that people at the back of the room haven't heard the question. So it's really important that there's a roving mic in the room. And again, you can use the co-chair or the students that are normally available at EAS to walk around the room with the microphone. But again, you're picking the person that is asking the question, and you clearly point to that person you are allowing to ask the question. Ensure that the answer from the speaker is brief and to the point. Again, you've only got 2 or 3 minutes for questions, so you want to keep brief. And if you feel that the question is going off point or is dragging on, again, feel free to jump in and say maybe you could continue this discussion after the session. Be ready to ask a question if there's none from the audience. Again, going back to your preparation, you've got a number of questions that you or the co-chair could ask. And you could also consider asking a colleague to pose a question from the audience to keep it a bit more interactive. A little bit about summing up then at the end of presentations. You obviously want to thank the presenters, you want to thank your co-chair, your AV. You definitely want to thank the audience for participating. You could consider promoting e-posters again at the end of your session. You could also highlight maybe another session that's taking place at the conference, which you believe is going to touch on some of the subjects that have been raised. Because obviously, a lot of the scientific work we're all involved in aquaculture is multidisciplinary, and it covers a broad range of different sessions. So again, feel free to highlight another session that you think is relevant and is taking place. And again, you can also highlight other conferences or workshops that are taking place. For example, if your session is on fish nutrition and there's a fish nutrition workshop coming up, by all means publicize that at the end of the session. I want to move on finally to an important aspect, which is a review, which is generally done at the end of the session, and you as a chair do a review for EAS. We would all love to send a review back saying, it was brilliant, I was fantastic, it was the best session ever held at an EAS Congress. But you generally want to give a bit more feedback than that. You have to really highlight what went well and what didn't. Was the room big enough? Was it well attended? What kind of subjects or topics were brought up that you believe maybe should be highlighted in future? Any feedback you have would be really gratefully accepted by EAS and used to better plan future sessions and future conferences. A few top tips then. I've mentioned a lot of these already. I think it's really important to take an active role as a chair. A chair is not somebody that just turns up on the day, sits down, takes the microphone and starts introducing people. You have to be better prepared than that and take an active role and put a bit of thought into how you're going to do the session. As I've mentioned already, and one of the purposes of today's talk is that we should really have more co-chairs at sessions. It's an important opportunity for people to develop the skills that are involved in chairing a session, to get a bit of experience without having to take all the responsibility. So I'd actively encourage any chairs out there to have a co-chair. Communicate again with the speakers before the conference. I think that's an important element which helps build a bit of trust between you and the presenters and opens the lines of communication, which can only be to the benefit of the session. Think of the future. So when you're convening a session, think of what research is up and coming, what new fields are being explored, and how they might apply to future research that's going to be done. So, for example, in recent years, we've seen a lot of new technology, new sensors, different robotics being used by researchers. You know, areas like that are up and coming, and it would be nice to see talks reflect that up and coming research as well. So bear that in mind when you're ranking talks and thinking about criteria. Get an early night before. This is really important, and we've all been there where you're in a beautiful European city, you're having a few beers, it's nice and warm, you're meeting friends and colleagues. You know, you've got a professional job to do the next day. You are going to chair a session. So please get an early night before. Don't leave it that you're heading to bed too late and then you're a bit groggy the next day. It's really important that you approach it professionally. And ultimately, enjoy the experience. EAS is an important society. We're all volunteers. We're all giving of our own time. So it's really important that you get the most out of the session and enjoy the experience. And with that in mind, it is, I think, about 30 minutes, Anna. So I'm going to try and keep the time myself. It wouldn't look well if I didn't. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I've given you a bit of insight into what's involved in chairing a session at EAS, and look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Damien. You perfectly done presentation, and you really well explained the steps from the start until the finish for the session chairs. In the way how you really simplified this, we hope that the people will decide to apply for the role of a session chair or the co-chair at the conference and realize that it's not such a difficult job to do at the end. We received, and thank you so much again for this, we received a question from an anonymous person, and he asked what is the acronym of AV stands for? That's audiovisual person, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, audiovisual. So they're generally obviously they're in charge of the sound on the day. So yeah, AV is short for audiovisual. Yeah.
And that's usually a student. Yeah, each room has one student who works as audio visual person.
I think actually, Anna, it's generally provided by either the hotel or the conference, and they're generally professional people. So the students tend to be helping out with seating people and at the entrance to the room. But generally speaking, the AV person is supplied by the organisers and their professional person.
That's correct, but not every session room has the audiovisual person.
Absolutely.
Only the big ones. So let's start with the second question. Could it be a good idea to ask the speakers in advance what questions from the chair would they like to reply? Should there be not questions from the audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's two schools of thought. Obviously, you want presenters to kind of build up a bit of resilience. Okay, so you don't want to give them too soft questions that they know the answers to and they know what's coming. I think I would generally try and suss out from them what areas of research, for example, they're going to continue to do, and maybe phrase a question around that. So you don't want it too laid out for people that it's you know, that there's a prepared question and a prepared answer. So generally speaking, I would try and find out what topics maybe that they would like to discuss, but I wouldn't generally let them know what the question is going to be.
Thank you, Damien. The next question is, you talk a lot about timing, and it's really, really important for the session chairs. But besides that, what do you think is the most stressful thing about the chairing the session, or is it the most stressful thing that can happen for them?
Yeah, I think, you know, timing is, and I guess this is where maybe if you're moderating is really difficult, because you're trying to keep an eye on lots of different things at the one time. I think you want to have a bit of flow in a session as well, and that's the problem with timing sometimes is, you know, it's very hard to cut off an interesting discussion or conversation that's happening. So you might bear that in mind, and if you have a bit of time at the end, you might revert back to that if the speakers are still in the room. And certainly, you know, EAS conference is about dialogue and discussion and conversation and allowing that to happen. So it's to try and have as natural a session as possible. But ultimately, you know, you live or die by those timings, and if you run over, it's gonna cause a backlog and issues. So you have to be very strict.
Yeah. So we receive another question from the audience. Could there be a template for the reporting of the progress of the session after the conference? Yeah,
so EAS have guidelines which they give to a session chair, which is quite a detailed guideline list, and I'm sure EAS can make that available for anybody, but it's normally sent out to the chair when you're convening a session, and it will include a template for reporting back a review afterwards. So that, yeah, so there's kind of set questions to try and, yeah, get a bit more detail about how the session went.
The next question is, what do you think is the most rewarding thing about chairing a session at a big international conference?
Oh, I think it's really interesting just to get a sense of what's going on around Europe in different areas and who's involved, and you know, it's an opportunity to meet new people. Like at every EAS Congress, you meet new people, and I think when you're chairing a session, you're obviously visible, you're up there in front of people, and you know, that quite often leads to discussions later on that night around dinner or whatever, where somebody will have been attended the session. So it's a fantastic opportunity to meet new people, new colleagues, experience new research that's going on, and can open up avenues in lots of different areas for you. So it's a great opportunity.
I definitely agree with you. Another question we received from the audience is, if one speaker is not present at the right time, do we have to let the slot empty and wait for the next speaker? So that's something that you discussed in your presentation about the non-show presenter. So
absolutely, yeah. Yes, so like a no-show is when the presenter is not present. And I believe strongly that that's when you should discuss the e-posters for that particular session. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to do that, and allows a bit of interaction with the audience. Generally, you can also have, if you know the day before, there's a supplementary list of talks, and you can slot in a talk from somebody that has submitted a talk but was referred to an e-poster. You can slot them in. Generally, you only do that the day before. On the day itself, I would say talk about some of the e-posters that you've prepared.
Thank you, Damien. And do you have any tips maybe for people who are presenting?
Yeah, I suppose preparation is key for presenting as well as chairing. The more you practice in front of colleagues or in front of the mirror, in front of your computer, really hone your talk. If it's a talk for Rimini, keep it to 10 or 12 minutes and practice. It's a good idea to use the notes function on PowerPoint because that gives you cue words or pointers to help you in your presentation. Obviously, you're using images, which are going to prompt you as well. I think, you know, in front of a live room is fantastic. That's where it differs here, Anna, where we're not seeing people, you know, visually in front of us. But in a room, I believe you should look around, look at people, you know, obviously be speaking to the room rather than just looking at one point at the back. You know, be a bit more interactive with the audience so they feel they're part of the presentation.
It's true. Yeah, sometimes it's a bit tricky when you're a bit too stressed and you don't know how you're gonna do it. Then yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, preparation is key, and ultimately we want people to enjoy their presentation and, you know, get across the work that they've done. They've done all the hard work. This is just presenting it.
Yeah. So let's see another question. But what about the late show? So what to do if a speaker shows, let's say, 5 minutes later than it should?
Okay, so is that a speaker coming to the actual room late for their presentation?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's a difficult one. I'm not sure that happens too often. I guess if they've turned up late, you're already probably talking about e-posters because they're a no-show. So you've gone into discussing an e-posters. If they suddenly come up and they've got there's 10 minutes left and their talk has been uploaded, absolutely let them give their talk, but you still have to stick to the time. You know, they now have 10 minutes instead of 15 minutes. Absolutely let them give their talk. I would hope that doesn't happen.
Oh, me too. But in general, I don't think that it's happening a lot.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Everybody's at least 15 minutes before their presentation in the room.
Most people, you'd see them nervously walking around the room beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah,
Going
that's
up in the corridor.
So the next question I have for you is, some people don't want to chair a session because they think it's just too much of their time. What do you think about that?
Okay, so again, this is perfect opportunity to co-chair because obviously you don't, as a co-chair, you don't have all the responsibilities, but you get to experience what's involved. And yes, it might seem a bit daunting, but it's absolutely something that's worthwhile. And I guess for those people in academia out there that are attending this webinar, it's an important aspect of any of your work is presenting and chairing, and you're going to be asked to do it on numerous occasions. So why not take the opportunity at EAS? We're all one big family. Nobody is going to, everybody's going to encourage you. And I think the co-chair is a good opportunity to develop those skills before you decide to chair a session. But as I mentioned already, EAS relies a lot on people voluntarily giving their time. And all the session chairs are voluntary. And all the students that help out are voluntary, and you know the majority of people that put a lot of time and effort to EAS are voluntary staff, so and voluntary members. So I'd absolutely encourage people to consider doing it.
Thank you, Damien. The next two questions we have are related to the e-poster. So let me first answer myself to the first question, which is, does everybody know in detail what is ePoster? So ePoster at the Aquaculture Europe is the regular poster that you would present in any other conferences or events, but they are not, you don't have to print it anymore. So their E stands for electronical posters. So you just upload it in the PDF version, and everybody can see it on the screen in the hotel rooms and also on your phones. And they are also available on the website. So ePoster stands for the electronical posters. And since 2 years ago, we are not using anymore the regular poster scheme. So we don't hang them around the hotels. So since 2 years, it's only electrical. But let me ask you, Damien, now the second question is about ePoster. How to discuss an ePoster in case a speaker doesn't show up? Would you select a poster according to whether the person who submitted it on site and let him or her present, or would you rather present it yourself?
So if you've convened a session, you've ranked the talks, and you're aware of what e-posters are there for your talk. So I would certainly reach out probably beforehand to 2 or 3 people that had e-posters on a particular session. So let's say it's fish welfare. So, and there's 10 e-posters on fish welfare. I would probably make myself known to 2 or 3 of those people and encourage them to attend the session if I thought that there was going to be a no-show. And by all means, ask them to give a short 2 or 3 minute presentation on their e-poster, or you as the chair could do that as well. The e-posters are obviously quite visual, so again, the audio-visual person can put them up on screen, and you can talk about obviously the short summary, the materials and methods, the discussion about what the work was done and the research. And obviously, if people are interested, you can revert them to look at that e-poster, or also let them know that the researcher is at the Congress and is available to discuss it. So it's just an interactive way rather than, I mean, we've been at sessions where there's no talk and everybody's just sitting around chatting. I think you should use those 15 minutes to publicize the e-posters.
Definitely. Definitely. And let me also say that I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but I sent the link of a brochure for Aquaculture Europe 2020. So you can also see all the list of the sessions that we will have this year. So please take a look at it, and yeah, let us know as well again now if you have any questions regarding them. But make sure that you check the website. And we don't have any questions anymore. Damien, would you like to maybe wait a minute or so to see if we have any engagement from the audience, or because we are already 48 minutes. So, okay. But I really enjoyed the talk.
Keep on time. We want to keep on time.
I mean, that's true, but I wouldn't mind sometimes staying a bit longer. I want to keep the time on the presentation. So it's 30 minutes of presentation.
Yeah.
But in case that we stay for 5 minutes longer during the Q&A, it's fine as well.
Yeah. And by all means, if people have questions and they don't want to put them up here, if they want to send us an email, we'd be happy to answer them. I definitely would encourage people to engage with the program co-chairs, and if they want, again, to nominate themselves to be a co-chair, there's no reason not to. And again, you know, you don't have to be an expert in your field. It's not expected. Your main role is that you're going to be helping with the management duties on the day. So nobody expects you to be, you know, absolutely thorough knowledge on the session. You know, it's a management function. So it helps you build experience and build connections. So again, don't be afraid to put your hand up and contact the program co-chairs and see can they facilitate you to be a co-chair.
Yeah, that's true. We received another question. Maybe I just missed it, but is the e-poster automatically in the file folder, or do I actively have to ask the person with the e-poster or the audiovisual person?
Okay, so you can get the PDF file of 2 or 3 posters that you want to discuss, and you can give them to the AV person, and they will have them ready to put up.
Yeah, cool.
Again, that's stuff you can do in the speaker prep room the day before. You have a list of all the e-posters. So yeah, again, yeah, take a proactive role on doing that yourself.
Correct, and they're also available on the aquaeas.org website, so you can easily download it, like even on the day of your session on your computer, and just give it to the audiovisual person. So you can easily access it also on your phone. So no worries about it. We have another question, which is how can we apply to be a co-chair?
So you could send an email to Anna there. I'm sure she would direct it to the right people. Or for Rimini, obviously it's Maria Letitia and Daniel Zarski. So yeah, by all means, contact them or anybody on the steering committee, and they'll try and facilitate you.
I will write down my email. I guess each of the participants knows it, but just in case, you can mark it down and just email me if you have any questions regarding this. So Damien, since we are, I think, at the end of the webinar, it would be nice to wrap it up. I would like to thank you so much for a great presentation you had. I think they will be encouraged to do it, and it's really not a big deal, and it's fun experience, and you learn so much about it doing it, and you again meet a lot of other people, and you networking, which is quite important. And yeah, so I think you really did a good job, and I hope our members will go and put their applications for this. I want to let you know that this webinar was also recorded. I wrote it down in the chat box, so you can re-watch it anytime you want to. It will be available at the end of this week on our YouTube channel, but make sure that you also check it out on our website, because on our YouTube channel it will be available only for a period of 1 month. And afterwards you can go and check it out on our website under the members section. And again, if you have any other questions, let me know, and that's it. Thank you so much, Damien. And regarding the next webinar, I will email you quite soon about the registration and the topic. Thank you so much once again. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.